A little while ago, I went on a first date, and afterwards, in the obligatory first date post-mortem, I sent a message to a friend that said, "Yeah, they're lovely, but I think they're a bit too nice for me." And the reply came back. Let me translate that for you. I don't deserve people treating me with kindness. Oh my God. It hit me like a lightning bolt. They were right. Of course, they usually are about these things, which is incredibly irritating, although obviously also incredibly helpful. But I sat there looking at that message on my phone, and I thought back over all my previous relationships, not just the romantic ones, the friendships as well. And I found the same thing glaring at me in all of them. I was so used to being treated badly that kindness felt, well, icky is the only word for it. Uncomfortable, something I wanted to get away from. And when I really bore down into what that icky feeling actually was, it was quite the surprise to discover that what it actually was threat. I was seeing kindness as threat. At first I thought, oh my God, I really am fucked up. But really, it makes perfect sense. Why wouldn't I? After a childhood where every kindness got used as a weapon to silence me, to force me to comply, to be produced later as evidence that my claims of bad treatment were invalid, kindness didn't come free of charge. It came with the highest price possible attached, because to accept it, I paid with my identity, my boundaries, my freedom even. So kindness became a red flag, and so did help, and confidence, and boundaries, and pretty much every single thing that any self-help book would tell you is a green flag, because my brain had learned to identify anything I'd been attacked for as a threat, in other people and in myself. And then I did what a lot of us do who grew up in that kind of environment, which is that I swung the pendulum right the other way and looked for what I was used to, which was, in short, emotional abuse, love bombing, breadcrumbing, stonewalling, gaslighting, and all the other delightful behaviours that to me were simply what a relationship involved. I believed love had to be dramatic. And if it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't just not love, it was disinterest. And to be really honest, it was boring. So that's what we're talking about today. Why your relationships keep following the same pattern, why you're just drawn to what's familiar is a nearly useless explanation, and what's actually happening in the moment you meet someone kind and feel absolutely nothing, or you have the same reaction I used to and feel threatened. I know you've been asking yourself, am I the problem? Let's find out with me, your host, Helen Villas. So, it happens. You meet someone, steady, kind, says what they mean, does the thing they said they'd do, texts back when they say they'll text back, and perhaps you feel flat, or a bit turned off maybe, or maybe more than that. Maybe you're suspicious that there's something false in it, a performance, something you just don't quite trust. Maybe you decide they're a pushover, a bit of a nerd maybe, and they're just too nice. And so, like me, you tell your friend that they're lovely but a bit too beige, or a bit too nice, or a bit boring, and most friends will say, "Oh, that's such a shame," because most friends will take you at your word. Mine, of course, didn't. And even though I already knew I had a wound around kindness and that it felt uncomfortable, that laser precision they used showed me exactly how I was stopping me choosing healthy. And then a few weeks later, maybe you meet someone who seems really into you, and the texting is constant. Feelings growing fast and deep. You feel so connected, and they feel the exact same way. And you laugh together about how crazy it is, about how fabulous it is. And about a fortnight in, they're saying all the things you've ever wanted to hear about yourself, how amazing you are, how they've never felt like this before, that they've never texted this much or get this all in this early, that you're different, and you're utterly convinced that this is the one. They make you feel like the most interesting person who has ever lived, Maybe they've even had some trauma that makes you feel protective of them, but also that you can trust them with yours too, especially when they get angry about how awfully you've been treated, and you feel validated, seen, powerful even, and most of all, perhaps amongst all the excitement, weirdly, you feel at peace. And then suddenly they evaporate, drop off the face of the earth without explanation, and you're confused, bewildered, terrified that something's happened to them and nobody knows to tell you, and you're desperately Googling their name to find articles of awful accidents, searching social media for their profile for clues, until just randomly they reappear days later, full of very believable reasons why they haven't been in touch. And any discomfort or anger or confusion is washed away by the wave of relief that they're okay and, more importantly, still into you. And you are hooked. Line, sinker, everything. You cannot stop thinking about them. You're checking your phone constantly. You've developed a Pavlovian response to your message tone, and you're disappointed every single time it isn't their name on the screen. You might even change their tone so you know it's them before you even look at the phone, and when it is them, you're flooded with joy, excitement, nerves. Your whole body is involved, and you call that chemistry. But the thing you're calling chemistry is quite often your threat system running at full tilt. And let me be very clear about something. No one actively chooses this. No one wants abusive relationships. Maybe the abuser, but no one enjoys this moment of realization. And whilst your brain has learned over years to respond to this pattern with everything it's got, you are not addicted to the drama or the chaos in the way some people like to suggest. That is utter nonsense, and it's cruel, and I don't want it anywhere near me or this episode. Nobody sat you down at 12 and asked whether you'd like to be someone who reads calm as boring. You got taught over years by people whose job it was to teach you the opposite, what love looks like and what it feels like and what it costs. You're just living the lesson you were taught, no more, no less. But it was a lesson you never should have learned. And if any of this doesn't fit you, that's fine. But before you discard it, allow it to just roll around a bit to be sure you're not defending something. It's very normal to be doing so. Then just take what's useful and leave the rest. Because if a piece of it doesn't apply to you, then all we've done is rule something out. And that's really actually very important and still worth knowing. So, now, the pattern also shows up in friendships too, and I really think this bit gets missed because the whole conversation about repeating patterns tends to get filed under dating, as though it's just like a romance problem. It's not. It isn't. It's a relationship problem, and friendships are relationships. The friend who only ever contacts you when they need something and then vanishes. The friend whose approval you're still, at 43, quietly trying to earn. The friend who makes little remarks that you laugh at and then think about in the shower 3 days later and can't explain to anyone else without sounding like you're overreacting, or at least you think you sound like that. Same pattern, same software running, it just doesn't get a Netflix documentary made about it. And in many ways, I think the friendship version is actually the harder one to see because of the gap that exists that makes it a friendship and not a romantic relationship. Think about the friend who runs hot and cold. Weeks of being absolutely brilliant. They're texting you, remembering things, inviting you to things. You feel chosen. Then a fortnight of near silence for no reason that you can actually identify. You see posts on social media of things that you haven't been included in, and it hurts. But then suddenly they're back, and it's wonderful again, and you don't ask about the fortnight of silence. And what are you doing in the silence? You're going back over the last conversation, looking for the moment that you got it wrong. You're drafting a message and maybe deleting it. You're checking whether they've posted, because posting means they're fine, which means it's you. Because that's what you make of evidence when you're assuming. And when they come back, you're so relieved that you're actively lovely to them, extra lovely. You bring your best material, your A game, you're funny, you're useful, you offer to help with the thing that they mentioned. So what you've then got is a 38-year-old adult doing a drawing, getting the good school report, going back with an achievement in your hands, hoping this is the one that keeps them warm. And nobody will ever validate that as abuse because it's just a friend who's a bit flaky. But trust me, it's abusive because it's harmful to you. It silences you, and the relationship depends on those two evil little tenets of abuse: silence and compliance. At work as well, that happens. The manager whose mood you can read from the sound of their footsteps in the corridor and whose approval you'd walk through fire for, and who has never once given you anything that wasn't a scrap. You are not, by the way, unlucky. That's the explanation a lot of people land on, because it's the only one available if you don't have the language, the knowledge. So you've concluded that you're cursed, or that you have appalling judgment, or that there's something visible on you that only the worst people can see. There isn't. But something is going on, and it's not luck, and it's not a character flaw. And it's actually really quite explicable once you look at what got installed by those that taught you what to expect from love, care, and relationships. So, there are three things going on here at the same time, and the reason you're drawn to what's familiar doesn't help you is it names the outcome and skips every one of those three things. The first one is the template. You did not learn about relationships from a book. You learned about relationships the way you learned about gravity, which is that you lived inside it before you had any language for it. And so it never presented itself as a claim that you could disagree with. Nobody ever said to you, in this house, love is conditional and unpredictable and comes with a bill attached. If they had said it, you could have argued. Instead, it was just, Tuesday. I remember very clearly when I was about 15 driving somewhere and saying very, very confidently, I don't believe in unconditional love. Everyone loves with conditions. And I gave an example of one of the conditions my mother put on loving me. An example I was utterly convinced at the time was fair and justified. And I'm not going to give the example because it's actually irrelevant. It's not the point. The point is that I believed it completely, and I'd have argued the absolute case for it. And now I find it unfathomable as a parent, and my heart breaks for the 15-year-old me who believed it. But of course I believed it. That's what I'd been taught, and it was what I was being shown every day from birth. Not to mention, of course, that my mother was right about absolutely everything. And if she was wrong, she was still right. This would be a great place to recite the narcissist's prayer. But we actually had a magnet on the fridge that said, rules of the house. 1, mother is right. 2, if mother is wrong, refer to rule 1. That she had put there completely unironically, and it was referred to constantly as a joke. And for those who are not watching on YouTube, inverted commas, but as is so often observed, there is always truth said in jest. And we all knew full well it was deadly serious. Looking back at it, it's utterly messed up, but teenage me rolled my eyes and laughed along, not questioning it at all, because it was our normal, and it just never crossed my mind to. The point is, the way you're shown love in a toxic home is what you take as normal, right up until the point that you work out that it may well have been your normal, but it definitely wasn't healthy. So when I say to you that a partner going silent for 3 days after an argument is a form of punishment, some of you will feel your whole system reject it. And you'll think, that's a bit dramatic, Helen. Everybody needs space sometimes. And you're right. Everybody does need space. Space is saying, I'm too angry to do this well right now. Give me until tomorrow. That's a person managing themselves and being kind in their anger and caring about their impact. 3 days of silence with no explanation is a person managing you. What that behavior communicates, whatever they intend by it, is I can remove myself and you cannot reach me, and you will be very, very good in an attempt to get me back. I obviously can't tell you what's in anyone's head. I don't know if it's conscious, but where there's a pattern of it, that's what it looks like to me. And I'd say the same thing if a friend told me about it in the pub. And what I can also tell you is that if you've explained it hurts you and they continue to do it, then there is at best awareness that it hurts you and a lack of care, and at worst, an intent to hurt you to make you comply. And this is the bit that makes the pattern so hard to see from the inside. It isn't that you see the red flag and override it, it's that it isn't flagged at all. Your detection system was calibrated by people whose behavior got easier the less you noticed. And it's a good system. It works exactly as designed. It's just that the design brief was someone else's. Now, here's where mine went further than that, and I suspect it may well be true for a lot of you. It wasn't only the bad stuff that didn't register as bad. It was the good stuff that registered as dangerous too. Because think about what kindness meant in that house. Kindness arrived, and it was lovely. And then it was on the bill. It got brought up the next argument. It got produced as evidence. Look at what I did for you. How can you say I treated you badly? I do everything for you. Or it arrived immediately after something horrible as the thing that was supposed to close the file. And if you didn't accept it, if you were still upset, then you were the difficult one. You were the one who couldn't let go of anything. So kindness stopped being kindness. Kindness became the front end of something that hurt, or the back end that brought your collusion into ignoring the hurtful thing. And that is straightforward conditioning. It's not mysterious. It's not a defect in you. Pair a neutral thing reliably enough with a bad thing, and the neutral thing starts producing the response the bad thing produced. Which means that when a decent human being is being warmed to you now, and you feel that pull to get away, that flinch, that icky feeling, your system is doing its job. It's identifying a warning sign. It's just working from a corrupted list. And I want to slow down this bit because I think it's actually probably one of the most useful bits in this episode, and it goes past very fast when you say it just as a principle. So here's what it actually looks like. Somebody at work, for example, notices that you're drowning in it, and they say, look, give me that presentation, I'll do the slides, you just do the numbers. And even though you feel guilty for rejecting them, it would feel worse to accept them. So you say, no, honestly, it's fine, I've got it. And you say that whilst you are visibly not fine, whilst you are going to be up until 1, 2, 3 in the morning, and you say it fast because before you've even really thought, and there is maybe a flicker of something in your chest as you say it, that you don't examine at all, because you're too busy declining. But what was that flicker? Probably, maybe, the arithmetic. 30 whatever years of learning that help arrives with a receipt, that if they do the slides, then you will owe them, and that at some future point in front of other people, at the worst possible moment, they will remind you that they did the slides. You didn't decide any of that. It happened in about 0.4 of a second, and all that reached you was the flicker and the word no. And afterwards, if you noticed anything at all, you noticed that they were a bit off with you for the rest of the day. And you concluded that they were probably annoyed because you rejected them or didn't allow yourself to be manipulated by them. And you filed that as further evidence that people are difficult and you were right to be suspicious of their kindness. That's the corrupted list running live. And the thing that got flagged as a threat was a colleague being kind to you on a Wednesday. So have a look at what else is on your list. Confidence, maybe, if you were punished for having any, or the person that was abusive was really confident, actually arrogant, it's different. Help, if help came with strings. Directness, if the direct people in your house were terrifying, or you were taught that you had to communicate through passive-aggressive or emotional management of the other person. Boundaries, if the only person allowed to have one was them, or that you were told crossing boundaries was evidence of love and care, or having boundaries was cold and rude and secretive and deceitful. Your list of red flags might be almost entirely made of green ones, and the things that actually should be flagged, the disappearing, the little digs, the rewriting of what happened last week, those went through unlabeled. And maybe actually both are red flags because you're on the healing journey. But if they went through unlabeled, because those were normal, they were just Tuesday. Your list will be yours, though. I'm guessing at yours based on what I see over and over again in my work, and I could easily be wrong about any specific item on it. So it's really important that you look at your own rather than relying exclusively on mine. And here's where the pendulum comes in, because this is the bit that makes it so much worse. Once your list is inverted, you don't just fail to spot the bad ones, you actively swing away from the good ones, and you keep swinging, because the safest place your system knows is the one furthest from what it has flagged as dangerous. And what it has flagged as dangerous is, amongst others, kindness. So the pendulum swings you clear of the calm, the steady, the reliable, the ones who say what they mean. And where does it land you? Right back in what you recognise. Love bombing, breadcrumbing, stonewalling, gaslighting, the whole delightful catalogue. And it feels like you're choosing it. It genuinely does. It feels like preference, like taste, like the mysterious business of who you fancy and who you don't. And you'll maybe even defend it as such. And other people will tell you that you have a type, and you may well agree. But you don't. You don't have a type, you have a pendulum, and it swings the same way every single time. And the person standing where it lands, well, that's not a coincidence. You weren't looking for pain, by the way. You were looking for love. And you had been taught a version of love that had the pain in it as standard. And when ADHD or autism are in the mix, the risk of being abused goes up. And to be very clear, not because there is anything wrong with the people who have them, but because they come with traits and trauma that an abuser can exploit. In one study by Gibbs and colleagues from 2021, almost 60% of autistic adults reported experienced sexual violence. And in that same study, measured the same way, it was around 28% of the non-autistic people. So roughly double. Same questions, same research, double the harm. And a separate systematic review, Trundle and colleagues, 2023, putting together 34 studies, found that around 84% of autistic people who had been victimised in more than one category. Not one bad experience, but several, across a lifetime, across different types. For ADHD, there's a large meta-analysis showing a higher risk of involvement in intimate partner violence for people with ADHD than for people without it. And here's the uncomfortable bit. That shows up on both sides of the ledger, as victims and as perpetrators. And the thing I really want you to take from those two sets of numbers is this. The wiring is adding something on top of the conditioning. It isn't the same risk wearing two hats. It's two separate things stacking, which is exactly why understanding both matters. And the mechanisms are really quite plain when you say them out loud. If your impulse control is poor and absolutely no judgment because same girl, then you commit fast. You're 3 weeks in and telling them your deepest, darkest secrets with abandon because you feel so safe, and perhaps because in your mind it keeps driving the connection. The relationship reaches a depth in a fortnight that would ordinarily take 6 months, and depth feels like safety. And so you're in it before any evidence has had time to arrive. And if you're autistic and you're operating maybe a rule-based model of people, which is a completely reasonable thing to do, by the way, given that the alternative is guessing and you can never seem to, or never did seem to get it right and got punished probably loads for it. They said they loved me, therefore they love me. They apologized, therefore it's resolved, right? You're taking language at face value, which, by the way, is, again, not a deficit. It's a functional assumption that most decent people meet. Just leaves you with no defense against someone who has worked out that those words are free. And on top of all that, most of you had your read on reality dismantled in childhood anyway. You'd say, that hurt, and be told, you're too sensitive. You'd say, this thing happened, and be told, it didn't, you're imagining it. You've been trained not to believe yourself and to ignore your feelings, so you do, because it was safest. So by the time you meet someone in adulthood who does something you don't like, and when you complain, they tell you you're overreacting and oversensitive, or seeing things that aren't there, or creating drama, or flat out that it never happened, and you do what you did as a child. Default to their version and dismiss yourself again. You don't even consider trusting yourself because you have decades of evidence that your perception can't be trusted. They told you so. What I also know is that if we sat together and I asked you, what did you ignore at the beginning? You might initially say nothing. Most people do, actually. But if I kept pulling at the thread, you might say, well, there was this thing. And you do it questioningly because you wouldn't be sure that it was a thing. But I know there was something. I know you noticed, and I also know you ignored it because of all that conditioning to do so. But I'll tell you a secret. That's the bit. It's that bit that you need to get really familiar with, because that's the bit that can protect you in the future. But I'll explain that more a little bit in a minute. The last of the three is intermittent reinforcement. And you'll have heard me talk about breadcrumbing, which is the behavior, and trauma bonding, which is what it produces, the bond itself. Intermittent reinforcement is the clinical description of what's driving both, and it works through conditioning, which I know feels like all of it does at this point, and that's because, well, it does. If you reward a behavior every single time, it becomes stable, and it's also fairly easy to extinguish, because as soon as the reward stops, the behavior drops off reasonably quickly. But if you reward it unpredictably, sometimes yes, sometimes nothing, no discernible pattern at all, that behavior becomes extraordinarily persistent. It is the single most resistant pattern of responding we know how to produce. And this isn't controversial. This is decades of behavioral science. It's why fruit machines make money and vending machines don't. Nobody stands in front of a vending machine feeding it coins for 4 hours. The vending machine always gives you the Twix. So the moment it doesn't, you kick it once and walk off, or make a phone call and complain. The fruit machine, however, gives you nothing, and then occasionally, unpredictably, the whole thing lights up, and you will sit there all night playing it. I used to work in pubs, and I would see people there for hours and hours, and just obsessed. It's the same thing. So apply that to a person. A partner who is warm on Monday, absent on Tuesday, cruel on Wednesday, and then on Thursday is suddenly the warm person again, the person you met, the attentive and funny and completely present, interested in you, has just run a variable reinforcement schedule on you. And your commitment to that relationship will be more intense, more persistent, and much harder to break than your commitment to somebody who is simply reliably kind to you all week. That is not a flaw in you. It's an entirely predictable output of the system you're running. And it would happen to almost anyone. And it happens to pigeons. Go and look up Skinner. It's very interesting. But here's what makes it so much worse for us. That thing, that unpredictable, high-stakes, occasionally transcendent thing, is the exact shape of what you already learned at home. You were already trained on a variable schedule. Your parent was warm sometimes. If they'd been cruel constantly, you'd have detached and got out a lot sooner, and a lot of you would have been spared years of it. In fact, it's something I hear regularly from my audience and my clients, the confusion of the contrast between the warm and the cold, how hard it is to reconcile the good times with the bad, and how hard it is to view the parent as abusive, because it wasn't all bad, and maybe they were trying their best. The dreadful thing, the cruelest thing perhaps, is that warmth was the most controlling thing of all. It kept you in. It kept you trying. It kept you believing that your behavior was what could make the difference. And sometimes it worked. So you would keep trying, just to try and get the clouds to break so you could feel the sun on your face, even just for the briefest moment. And then you get into adulthood, and the pattern is set, familiar, possibly even comfortable. And it enrages me for you that was done to you, and indeed me. It's disgusting, repugnant that the people who set the bar for what to expect from love didn't just set it low, they bent it into a shape that you could be beaten with until someone like me comes along and tells you it's not right and it's not your fault. And what you're calling chemistry, that pull, that can't stop thinking about them, that's this. It's the anticipation of an unpredictable reward, and it's very hard to tell apart from being in love. And nobody has ever taught you the difference. In fact, they did the exact opposite. The calm you feel with the kind one isn't the absence of chemistry. It's the absence of threat. And in a horrible, ironic twist, it can be the most uncomfortable feeling of all. So, What do you actually do about it all? I want to be honest before we start this bit. This is one of the slower ones. Nothing here works in a week, and if I told you otherwise, I'd be lying to you for the sake of a nicer ending. So start with that audit, the list, and do it in writing, because doing it in your head is where this kind of dies. You forget. Take your last 3 or 4 relationships and include the friendships. And I'd actually include a difficult work one as well if you've got one. And rather than writing what they did, which is where most people, everybody pretty much, starts, and it actually isn't the useful bit, write what you did. Start with this. At what point did you know something was off? Not when did you admit it, not when did you leave. When did you know? When did you first have a little niggle? When, as I said earlier, for most of you, it will be startlingly earlier. I can't say the word startlingly, but it will be very early. Week 2, maybe even week 1, maybe day 1. There'll be a specific moment, a remark, a look, a thing they said about their ex, a way they spoke to a waiter, a way they dismissed you, something. And you'll be able to find it if you're honest, because you've never actually forgotten it. And then the important bit, what did you do with that information? I'd bet, and by all means, of course, tell me if I'm wrong here, that you explained it. You found a reason. They'd had a hard week, they were tired, they didn't mean it like that. That's just their sense of humour. You were probably being oversensitive because you know you can be. And you did that because explaining people's behaviour is what kept you safe. In that house, working out why they were like that was the only way to predict what was coming next. And it was a genuinely good strategy, and it worked. It's just that the strategy has outlived the situation it was built for, and now it's doing precisely the opposite job, which is keeping you in things. So that's the move. That's the one that repeats. That's your leverage point, because you can't control who you're attracted to, and you can't stop your body doing what it does when someone unpredictable walks into the room. But you can absolutely learn to catch yourself building the defense case. That specific mental activity, the sentence that starts with, to be fair to them, is worth more to you than any red flag list on the internet. The flags themselves are personal and contested, and everyone's different. The explaining is universal, and it's yours, and you can catch it. And when you do the audit, do it for all of them at once, side by side, on the same page, because one relationship is a story, and 4 relationships is data on its own. Each one had reasons laid out next to each other. You'll see the same week 2, the same explanation, the same fortnight of silence you didn't ask about, and there is no version of that which is bad luck 4 times. If any of that felt like being seen, come and find us in the Hub. It's my membership, and it's where the work happens rather than just the recognition. There are courses, there are live calls with me, and there's a community of people who all had the same thing installed and are all at various stages of pulling it apart, which means you can say the thing that you can't say to friends who had normal parents. And everybody in the room already knows the shorthand. The other thing you get is Is This a Thing?, which is included from foundation tier upwards. So this week's on building identity is in there with everything else. It's liberationacademy.co.uk/the-hub. Come and have a look. No pressure. If you're not in a place to do this right now, that's completely fine. It'll still be there when you are. Hope that helps. Take care. Bye. Now, the hard part. You have to be prepared to sit through the flatness with the kind ones. And I mean sit through it, because you will not think your way past a conditioned response. You have to run the experiment. If kindness has been paired with harm for 30 years, then the only, and the rest I might add, then the only thing that changes it is repeated exposure to kindness that doesn't end in harm. It's slow and it's genuinely unpleasant, because you have to tolerate feeling nothing or feeling faintly repelled for long enough for your system to start collecting new evidence. Give it 6 dates rather than 2. That's an arbitrary number, invent your own, but have one, because I'll just see how I feel hands the decision straight back to the very system that keeps, getting it wrong. And when the flatness arrives, and it will, notice it as data rather than as a verdict. It isn't a message about them. It's a message about your calibration. That said, and this matters, This is not an instruction to override yourself indefinitely. Some people are genuinely wrong for you. You're allowed to leave without producing a spreadsheet. What I'm asking for is a hearing before the verdict, not a life sentence of dating people you don't like just out of principle and trying to recondition yourself. And the next one is small, and it's the one people actually typically manage, which is the only reason I actually really bother with it. Introduce a delay. Whatever your natural pace is, ADHDers, are you listening? And again, no judgment because same, but this does really work for people like us. Whatever your natural pace is, double it. Not because rushing is a moral failing, but because evidence takes time to arrive, and the only way to see who somebody is under pressure or just who they are really is to still be there when the pressure turns up, or allowing time for things to reveal themselves. Nobody's mask fails in week 3. Masks fail in month 5, longer even. And if that means you spend 4 months in something that feels agonizingly slow, whilst every part of you is screaming to declare undying love and move in together, then good. That discomfort is what it feels like when nobody is jerking you around. And you've just simply never been in that position before. So of course it feels wrong and gross and weird and uncomfortable and restrictive. But now, you also need something from outside your own head because, as we have established, the instrument you were given is unreliable. And you know it is. And that is the whole problem. So borrow somebody else's, one person. It has to be somebody whose judgment you really trust, you actually rate, somebody who is honest, somebody who won't just agree with you, and you describe the behavior to them without any of the context or the explanation that you'd normally supply to make it make sense. Not, he went quiet for 4 days, but he's been really under a lot of pressure at work and his dad's ill. Just, he went quiet for 4 days. What do? How do they react? What's their face doing? Now, some of you are going to be sitting there thinking, but I did leave, I got out, I did all of that. And then I went and picked the same person again in a different jumper. And I know, because that's the bit nobody warns you about. Leaving is not the same thing as recalibrating. Leaving removes the person. It changes the environment. It does nothing whatsoever to the detection system. And the detection system is what selected them in the first place. Your system doesn't update because you walked out. It updates on evidence repeatedly over time, which means that if you leave and then go straight back out into the world with the same inverted list, the list will just do exactly what the list does. And the other thing is that you can swing the pendulum again to choose the complete opposite of who you dated before and still end up with the same pattern, because it might look different, but refusing to argue can be just as controlling as screaming at you for leaving a knife on the side. We just don't necessarily realize it until it's too late. And just to be very clear, that is not failure. That is an unrewired system doing its job. To change it, you need 3 things. To understand that it's never been about trusting other people and always been about trusting yourself. That to trust yourself, you need to build knowledge of yourself, concrete, absolute knowledge, or identity in other words. And finally, you need to get used to the idea of rejection being a good thing, which actually kind of happens naturally when you build identity. So for me, at the root of everything, when it comes to healing and protection, the very best protection against abusive relationships is a very robust identity. And that doesn't happen overnight. And it's why I stayed single for such a long time, because I wasn't sure I could. I wasn't sure I could trust myself. But when I started dating again last year, I proved to myself I could trust myself, to remove myself from things that were hurting me, as well as giving me all the gooey, exciting feelings, and that I wouldn't just kick grief and the pain of the ending further down the road to avoid the pain now, and that I could do it regardless of how I might hurt the other person as a result. And of course, it would never be my intention to hurt anyone, but self-protection does that sometimes. But that isn't mine or even yours to manage. And when you start doing all that, you start being able to accept kindness and care and healthy boundaries and paced getting to know someone. You don't feel the urgency to push the relationship forward to a place you're not scared you'll be rejected anymore, Well, because that's a lot of reason why we do it quite often. And then you can stand centered and grounded and know that if something doesn't work out, if someone rejects us, it's not a measure of our worth, our value, or confirmation of all those things they told us we were to force us into submission for fear that we actually were. There's one final very quick note that's very important. At some point, understanding this becomes the thing you do instead of leaving. Understanding was the thing you did to make sense of their behaviour, as we've said, to reconcile it, to force yourself to tolerate it. Understanding doesn't absolve you from acting. You do not need to understand a behaviour to know whether you need to tolerate it. You do not need to have a good enough reason to leave a relationship. You do not need anyone else to agree that you should leave to give you permission to leave. The good does not pay for the bad. The warmth doesn't cancel the cold. It is part of the control, and you don't have to dismiss your hurt because they're trying or doing their best or have their own trauma. You are not a waiting room or their therapist or unkind or empathetic if you leave. It is enough that it hurts you, and it is more than enough that you are being eroded while you wait for promises of better behaviour to materialise. In Is This a Thing this week, we're looking at building identity, what it looks like to have one, not have one, how to practically start doing it. I'll be running a 5-day identity building challenge on the Hub soon too, by the way. It'll be included in membership of Core and Coaching Plus members, or you will be able to buy access individually if you would prefer to too, because I really believe it really is the root cure, I suppose, for want of a better word, for healing and protection, and I can't ever emphasize that enough. Next week, we're going to be talking about conflict and what healthy conflict even looks like when one of you or both of you is ADHD or autistic and carrying a family history of emotional abuse trauma. So if you would like to share, I'd love to know, what does your body do in the first 10 seconds of a disagreement? Not what you say, what happens before you say anything. And I'll tell you mine. My head feels like it's detaching, glitching from my body sometimes. So I'd love to know what yours is. Come and tell me on all the usual places. Thank you as ever for listening, and as ever, all that remains to be said is take care.